The room smelled faintly of old wood and paper, the air heavy with silence that pressed down like a weight. The young man sat stiff in the leather chair, his hands folded, his jaw tight, his heart pounding beneath the calm mask he forced onto his face. The lawyer shuffled papers slowly at the desk, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose, his eyes cautious as if he already knew the storm that was about to break. Outside the tall windows the city carried on. Cars honking, people rushing. But inside that room time felt frozen, the air heavy, the shadows long. Finally the lawyer cleared his throat, his voice steady but strained. As per the will of your late father, we are gathered here to read the distribution of his estate. The young man's chest tightened. He had imagined this moment so many times, not because he desired the wealth, but because it was his father's last gift, the fruit of years of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice. A legacy meant to continue through him. He remembered his father's hands, rough with labor yet steady with kindness. The way he spoke about honor, about family, about protecting what was theirs. The memories burned bright as the lawyer spoke, the first lines soft and respectful. But then the words twisted like knives. To my dear brother, the lawyer read, pausing, I leave full control of the company and assets, including all properties, accounts, and shares. The silence that followed was deafening. The young man blinked, his body rigid, his mind screaming, but his lips stayed sealed. The lawyer looked up briefly, eyes full of pity, before continuing. This is final and binding, signed and stamped. The sound of the last page flipping was like thunder. The will was over, the fortune gone, stolen, not by strangers, not by enemies, but by blood, his own uncle. The young man's breath slowed, his fists clenched tightly in his lap, his knuckles white, but he made no sound. He looked across the table, and there his uncle sat, dressed in an expensive suit, his thick fingers heavy with rings, his smile wide, smug, dripping with victory. The uncle leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth, sharp. Don't look so shocked, boy, your father made the right choice. You're too young, too naive, you would have wasted everything. But me? I know how to grow it, how to turn his legacy into something greater. His words cut like glass, his smile deepened. Of course, you'll be provided for, you won't starve, but the empire, the power, it belongs to me now as it always should have. The young man's chest burned, fire roaring beneath the calm surface. His eyes fixed on the uncle, unblinking, cold. But still he stayed silent. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm between them. But no storm broke in that room. The uncle laughed, stood, and clapped a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder. Be grateful, boy, at least I'm family. I could have left you with nothing. Oh wait, I already did. His laugh echoed as he walked out, his shiny shoes clicking against the marble floor, his arrogance filling every corner of the office. The board members who had gathered followed him quickly, bowing their heads in respect. No one looked at the young man. No one dared speak. Only the sound of his father's name, stripped and twisted, echoed in his mind. When the room emptied, the young man stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He gathered the pieces of himself that felt shattered, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the door. The lawyer called softly, I'm sorry. I know your father would never have wanted this. But the young man didn't reply. He only gave a faint nod and walked out into the bright city streets, the noise of traffic rushing around him, the world moving as if nothing had changed. But inside him everything had. His silence carried a storm, his eyes carried fire. He walked past the tall buildings, past the people rushing with their small lives, and every step he took burned with a vow unspoken yet carved deep into his soul. He would not forget, he would not forgive. He would not rest until every lie was torn apart, until every stolen coin was returned, until the man who laughed in his face would one day choke on his own pride. The young man did not scream, did not cry. He did not collapse under the weight of betrayal. He carried it with him like steel, sharp and cold. His silence became his shield, his anger his weapon. The world believed he was broken, that he had lost everything, but he knew better. He knew loss was not the end, it was the beginning. And though he walked away empty-handed that day, he carried something far more dangerous than money. He carried patience, he carried memory, and he carried fire, the kind of fire that does not burn quick and bright but slow and deep, the kind of fire that waits in silence until the right moment to consume everything in its path. And in that silence, in that quiet vow, the seeds of revenge began to grow. The uncle's voice echoed in his ears as he walked away, the smug laughter, the mocking words, the arrogance of a man drunk on stolen power. It replayed again and again until it no longer stung but hardened him, shaping him like steel hammered in flame. The young man did not return home that night. There was no home left for him. The house his father built was gone, swallowed by greed, the doors locked, the gates closed, the inheritance stolen. Instead he walked into the unknown, into the shadows of the city, where no one knew his name, no one knew his pain. And there in the silence of the night he whispered to himself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And though no one heard him, though no one saw the fire in his eyes, the city itself seemed to tremble, as if it knew that one day this young man, stripped of everything, would return not as the broken heir but as the man who would buy the empire built on lies and take back what was his, not with begging, not with shouting, but with power greater than his uncle could ever imagine. The city forgot him quickly, people always do. One day he was the son of a respected man, the heir of a family name. The next day he was nothing, stripped of money, stripped of home, stripped of pride. His uncle's shadow stretched over everything. The newspapers praised the uncle as a brilliant businessman. The board hailed him as a strong leader, while whispers about the young man faded. Some said he had run away in shame. Some said he was too weak to fight. Others laughed and called him foolish for trusting family. But the truth was different. The young man had not vanished out of weakness. He had stepped into silence by choice, the silence of planning, the silence of waiting, the silence of shadows. At first life was hard. He slept in cheap rooms, worked small jobs, his hands blistered, his body bruised. Yet every coin he earned he saved, every hour of pain he treated as training. He read at night under dim lamps, books on business, on finance, on law. Words that once seemed heavy became his weapons. His uncle had stolen his inheritance, but he would build an empire that no one could steal, brick by brick, page by page. He studied until his eyes burned, worked until his muscles ached. The fire in his chest, the only thing that kept him moving, the memory of that smug laugh, the fuel that never ran out. Years slipped by quietly. The uncle grew richer, his empire louder. But the young man moved in silence, connecting with people who noticed his discipline, mentors who saw beyond his lack of money, investors who admired his patience. Slowly he learned the art of deals, of mergers, of buying and selling power without lifting a weapon. He worked in companies his uncle didn't even know existed. He built trust where his uncle only built fear. He learned loyalty where his uncle only demanded obedience. And with every connection, every small victory, his shadow grew longer. There were nights he thought of giving up, nights when hunger twisted his stomach, when exhaustion blurred his vision, when the weight of loss felt too heavy. But then he would close his eyes and see his father's face, the pride, the honesty, the legacy stolen from him, and he would hear his uncle's voice, laughing, taunting, daring him to fail, and that memory would push him back to his books, back to his work, back to the fire. He didn't announce his progress, he didn't brag. While his uncle held banquets and showed off wealth in magazines, he stayed silent, letting the world believe he was nothing. But behind that silence his wealth grew quietly, his allies grew stronger, his skills sharpened, and his patience turned into a blade so sharp it could cut an empire in half. The uncle never suspected. How could he? He believed his victory was final. He believed the boy had broken. He sat on his throne of lies, blind to the storm forming in the shadows, blind to the eyes watching every move, blind to the fact that the man he laughed at was slowly building the power to one day walk back into his life not as the broken heir but as the owner of everything he thought untouchable. The young man no longer rushed, he no longer burned with wild anger, his fire was controlled now, steady, disciplined. He learned to smile when needed, to wait when others grew impatient, to strike only when the ground beneath his enemy was weakest. He became more than what he had lost. He became something his uncle could never be. Dangerous in silence, powerful in patience, unstoppable in resolve. And so, while the world forgot his name, while the city only saw the rise of his uncle, the young man disappeared into shadows not as a broken soul but as a storm preparing. And when the time came, he would not ask, he would not beg, he would not scream. He would return quietly, calmly, and by the very empire built on the ashes of his inheritance. And when he did, the laugh of his uncle would turn into the last echo of a man who never saw revenge walking toward him in silence. The uncle's company rose like a giant tower in the city, its glass windows shining in the sun, its name printed on banners, on newspapers, on the lips of every businessman who feared or respected him. The uncle walked its halls like a king, dressed in suits stitched by the finest hands, his gold watch flashing with every arrogant gesture. He gave speeches about strength, about growth, about his genius, and the world clapped, the board bowed, the employees kept their heads down. But behind the polished walls the truth was wrought, hidden cracks that grew wider every year, cracks only a careful eye could see. He built his empire not on honesty but on manipulation. He bullied small companies into selling cheap. He cut corners, cheated partners, bribed officials, and forced employees to sign contracts that chained them in silence. Those who opposed him were crushed, their voices erased, their careers destroyed. People smiled at him in meetings but cursed his name in private. Investors shook his hand but counted their losses in secret. The shine of his empire was only paint covering rust. But he was too blind with pride to see it, too drunk with power to care. At first, no one dared question him. His greed was law, his voice final, but slowly, quietly, whispers began to spread. Small investors noticed that their returns were shrinking. Employees muttered about payments delayed. Suppliers complained of bills left unpaid. Rumors grew, and then came the strangest pattern of all. Shares of the company, small ones at first, then larger, were being bought up by an unknown hand. Silent purchases, clean transactions, no noise, no attention, just quiet pieces of the empire disappearing into the shadow of a nameless investor. The uncle laughed when the board mentioned it, his voice booming. What fool thinks he can challenge me with pocket change? I built this from nothing. I control every piece. No shadow investor can touch me. He waved his fat hand and ordered them back to work, but the doubt in their eyes lingered, because they had seen the reports. The unknown investor wasn't stopping. He was buying with purpose, buying with patience, his trail invisible but his presence undeniable. Meanwhile, inside the company walls, fear grew. Employees whispered in the break rooms. Have you noticed how many are leaving? Suppliers are pulling out. Something's wrong. Managers hid reports that showed debts stacking, projects failing, but no one dared put the truth on the table, because the uncle's rage was legend. He screamed at board members, slammed fists on tables, threatened lawsuits against anyone who questioned him. His empire looked tall, but its foundation was weak, built on lies and fear, and now the cracks were spreading like veins of fire. The young man who had vanished years ago was the shadow behind those cracks. Every coin he had saved, every ally he had built, every skill he had sharpened was now a blade carving into the empire. But he didn't show his face yet. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any announcement. His patience was the storm no one could predict. He bought shares quietly, gathered partners silently, and waited as the uncle unknowingly sold pieces of his own throne. By the time the uncle noticed, the damage was done. Whole branches of his company were already in the control of the unknown hand. Employees who once bowed to him now whispered that maybe his time was ending. Suppliers looked elsewhere. Investors hesitated before shaking his hand. And though the building still shone in the sunlight, inside it was shaking, trembling, ready to collapse under the weight of the lies it had been built on. And in the shadows, the man he once mocked, the heir he once robbed, was watching it all unfold with cold eyes, waiting for the moment to step into the light and claim what was his. The boardroom was filled with polished wood, tall windows, and men in dark suits whispering nervously among themselves. Papers shuffled, phones buzzed, and the air was heavy with tension. The uncle sat at the head of the long table like a king on his throne, his gold watch glinting, his thick fingers drumming on the table with impatience. His booming voice cut through the murmurs. Enough of this nonsense about falling shares. The market is weak, but we are strong. This company is untouchable because I lead it. He leaned back, his arrogant smile stretching wide. The board nodded quickly, some out of fear, some out of habit, but doubt lingered in their eyes. They had seen the numbers. They knew the empire was cracking. Still none dared speak. The uncle's shadow was too heavy. Then the double doors opened, the sound sharp in the silence. Heads turned, Conversations froze, and footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Slow, steady, deliberate. A man in a dark suit stepped into the room, his face calm, his presence heavy. The years had carved strength into his frame. His eyes cold, sharp, unflinching. Some of the board members frowned in confusion. Whispers rose. "Who is he? I know that face, don't I?" The uncle's smile faltered slightly, his brow furrowing as recognition tugged at him. The man walked all the way to the table, placing a thick folder down with care, then stood straight, his silence louder than any introduction. The boardroom air tightened like a string pulled too far. The uncle finally leaned forward, his voice sharp. "And who are you to walk into my meeting uninvited?" The man's lips curled faintly, his voice calm but heavy. "You know who I am." The uncle's eyes widened for just a second before he forced a laugh, loud and mocking. "Impossible. You disappeared years ago. Broken, ruined, forgotten. Don't pretend to be the boy I crushed. He would never dare stand here." The man slid the folder open, revealing documents, contracts, ownership certificates, each stamped and sealed, proof of shares bought silently over the years. His voice steady, cutting through the room. "The boy you stole from is gone. What stands before you is the man who owns the company you built on my inheritance." The room erupted in gasps. Board members leaned forward, their eyes wide. One whispered, "He owns majority shares." Another muttered, "It's real. These are authentic." Phones buzzed as messages spread across the city, news breaking through walls faster than words could travel. The uncle's face drained of color, his fat fingers clenching the armrests of his chair. "This is a trick, a lie, a scam," he roared, but his voice trembled, betraying his fear. The man did not flinch, did not raise his voice. He simply pushed forward more papers, proof layered thick. "While you boasted, I bought. While you laughed, I worked. While you built lies, I built truth. And now your empire belongs to me." His words dropped like hammers, each one cracking the foundation of the uncle's arrogance. Board members shifted in their seats, some eyes lighting with relief, others with fear, but all of them turning away from the uncle, the power in the room shifting silently. One director spoke carefully. "If this is true, then he is the largest shareholder. His vote outranks yours." Another added, "Legally, he controls the company now." Their words cut deeper than any knife. The uncle slammed his fist on the table, the sound loud but hollow. "You're fools, all of you. I made you rich, I gave you power, and you would betray me for him?" But even as he shouted, his voice carried less weight, his throne of lies crumbling beneath him. The man leaned forward, his eyes cold, his tone calm but sharp. "You didn't make them rich, you made them prisoners. You ruled with fear, but fear dies when truth walks in the door, and I am that truth." The silence that followed was heavy, the board's eyes now locked on him, the new master of the table. The uncle's power bleeding out like water through cracks. The young man who once left that lawyer's office in silence had returned, not as a beggar, not as a victim, but as the man who had bought back his father's legacy piece by piece, and now stood ready to take everything his uncle once stole. The uncle's face burned red as the boardroom filled with whispers. His voice cracked like thunder as he slammed both fists on the polished table. "This is fraud. This is a setup. None of this is real." But his eyes betrayed him, darting nervously to the stack of stamped documents laid neatly before everyone. The man did not flinch, he stood calm, his silence louder than the shouting, his eyes steady like stone. The uncle snatched a paper from the pile, shaking it in the air. "You forged these, you bribed someone at the registry. I'll have my lawyers rip this to shreds in court." His words came, fast, desperate, but the board members shifted uncomfortably. They had already scanned the seals, the signatures, the county records attached, and they knew the truth. This was no forgery. This was real. One director cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. "We can verify everything ourselves, but from what I see, these are legitimate." Another added, "If that's the case, then your authority is gone. His vote outweighs yours." The uncle's face twisted, sweat dripping from his temples. "You cowards, I made this company. I built it from the ground," he shouted, spit flying. His gold rings clattering as he slammed the table again. But no one looked convinced. His arrogance no longer commanded. Fear, it smelled of desperation. The man finally spoke, his voice calm, each word cutting sharper than his uncle's screams. You didn't build it, you stole it from me, from the family that trusted you, and you fed it with lies and corruption. This empire isn't built on strength, it's built on rot, and now everyone can see it. His words dropped heavy, the board leaned closer, their doubts now shaping into decisions that would crush the uncle. Desperate, the uncle turned to his allies, the same board members who once bowed to him. Tell him he has no right here, stand with me. But they averted their eyes, one muttered. We can't fight the truth, another whispered. We've been blind too long. Their betrayal cut deeper than the man's accusations, and for the first time the uncle felt the weight of his throne collapsing under him. In a final attempt, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor, his voice booming. Fine. You think you're clever. You think you've won, but I'll sue you. I'll drag you through every court in this country. I'll crush you like I should have years ago. His finger pointed like a dagger, his words trembling with rage, but the man remained still, his eyes locked on him, his tone quiet yet dangerous. Take me to court, and you'll lose more than your company. You'll lose your freedom. He slid another envelope across the table. The uncle snatched it, tore it open, and froze. Inside were copies of records, evidence of his bribes, fraudulent deals, stolen money routed through hidden accounts. His hands trembled. His lips moved but no words came out. The board gasped, some covering their mouths, others glaring with disgust. One director said firmly, If this comes out, the authorities will bury you. The uncle's knees buckled slightly, his arrogance cracking, his empire crumbling, his threats turning to dust in his throat. He looked around the room desperately. But there were no allies left, no loyal servants, only eyes filled with judgment. The man stepped closer, his presence towering, his voice still calm. You had your reckoning the day you stole from me. All I did was wait for the world to see it. The uncle stumbled back into his chair, his chest heaving, sweat soaking through his shirt, his kingdom slipping through his fingers, the board no longer his to command, his power gone, his lies exposed, and in that moment the truth was undeniable. The man he once mocked as weak now stood as judge, jury, and executioner of his empire. The boardroom had turned into a battlefield without weapons, only silence, papers, and truth cutting sharper than any blade. The uncle sat hunched in his chair now, his fat fingers trembling as he clutched the envelope of evidence, sweat dripping down his forehead, his once booming voice reduced to shallow gasps, his eyes darting desperately from face to face, looking for someone, anyone, to defend him. But no one spoke. The board members sat rigid, their eyes cold, their loyalty gone, years of fear broken in a single night. The clerk at the end of the table adjusted his glasses and said in a quiet but steady tone, The documents are valid, the shares are in his name, there is no question, he is the legal owner. His words fell like a hammer on stone, final and unshakable. The uncle's shoulders slumped lower, the gold rings on his hands gleaming like useless trophies of a lost war. The man stepped forward, calm as ever, his presence filling the room. He didn't need to raise his voice. Every ear leaned toward him, every eye fixed on him. His tone was steady, heavy with years of silence that had sharpened into steel. You thought stealing my inheritance would end me. You thought your lies would bury me. But all they did was bury you. I disappeared because I needed time. And while you grew fat on stolen wealth, I grew strong. I built what you could never touch. And I waited for this day. He placed a hand on the back of the chair at the head of the table, the very chair his uncle had ruled from for years. And now, I take back what was mine, not only the inheritance you stole, but the company you poisoned with your greed. Gasps filled the room. The board members exchanged glances. One finally spoke aloud. The vote is clear. The majority is his. There is no argument. Another added. We stand with him. Their words turned the tide completely, and the uncle's face twisted with rage and desperation. His voice broke into a scream. You traitors, all of you, you'd abandon me for him? I made you rich. But his words no longer carried weight, no longer carried fear. The board members didn't flinch. Some even smirked, others looked relieved. The spell of his power was broken forever. The man leaned closer, his voice low but cutting through the noise. You didn't make them rich, you chained them, you ruled by fear. But fear dies when the truth stands tall. He straightened, his calm returning, his eyes locked on his uncle's broken face. You told me once I'd be left with nothing. But look at you now. You are the one with nothing. The uncle's lips trembled, his pride shattered. He tried one last time to stand, to roar, to command. But his legs shook, his knees buckled, and he collapsed back into the chair, his body heavy. His eyes wide with disbelief that the throne he thought eternal had been torn away in moments. Security guards stepped into the room quietly. Summoned by a silent nod from the board, they stood ready, waiting for the final word. The man looked at his uncle, his voice calm, almost soft, but deadly in its certainty. You laughed when I lost everything. You laughed when I walked away with empty hands. But who laughs now? You stole my inheritance, and I took your kingdom. This is my final word. He pulled the chair away from the table, sat down slowly, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly on the armrests, the symbol of power passing without force, without noise, simply by truth. The board clapped lightly, some in relief, some in respect. The guard stepped forward, one officer placing a firm hand on the uncle's shoulder. Sir, you need to leave. The uncle's eyes widened in horror. No, no, this is my seat. This is my company, you can't do this to me, he shouted, his voice breaking into a desperate cry. But no one listened, no one defended him, his power was gone. His crown shattered, dragged down by his own greed. The guards pulled him to his feet, his gold watch flashing one last time before he was escorted out of the room, his shouts echoing down the hallway, sounding more like a defeated beggar than a king. The man sat silently at the head of the table, his eyes sweeping the board, his presence calm but commanding. This company will no longer be ruled by fear, no longer be poisoned by greed. Today begins a new era, one built on truth. His words were simple, but they carried more strength than the uncle's years of shouting ever had. The board members nodded, some with relief, some with respect, and as the meeting ended, the man leaned back in the chair that once belonged to his enemy. A faint smile tugging at his lips, not of arrogance, not of greed, but of justice finally complete. His father's legacy restored, his revenge delivered. Outside, the city buzzed as news spread, employees whispered, "He's back, he owns everything now." Investors nodded with approval, neighbors remembered the injustice and smiled at the thought of balance restored. And somewhere down the street, the uncle's voice cracked in rage, shouting at a world that no longer listened, his empire gone, his power erased, his throne stolen by the very man he once mocked. The young man who had walked away silent years ago had returned as the master of it all. And the story ended not with a scream of anger but with the calm silence of victory.